This module will discuss student activities in the classroom and laboratory. First of all, with respect to student use of the lab and the equipment in the lab, we want the students to be focused on doing the assignments that you provide for them, and they shouldn't be doing other work outside for their family or their next door neighbor or those sorts of things. We want the time in the lab to be focused on the skill development that you are trying to teach your students. That students also should only undertake tasks and work on equipment that they've been trained on, that they've been checked off on, that you feel comfortable with them using. And lastly, that students in other programs should not be in your laboratory using equipment. I know in a lot of career centers, the labs join each other, and you can have students walk through one doorway and they'll be in another lab, and you have to keep track of who's using the laboratories and make sure that it's your students. You don't want somebody who has not been checked off on your equipment using it. So that's a safety and liability concern. When you do customer service work, and some of you will have these types of programs where you'll be doing work for the community, you will get pressured to do things that perhaps you haven't covered with students. You may have the knowledge to do it yourself, but the students may not. And what I've always told my teachers is to fall back on the course of study, so that if you are running an automotive program, for example, and someone asks you to do a brake job, I always tell my teachers, well, just tell these individuals, listen, we're doing oil changes right now. We haven't gotten to brakes. We will let you know when we're ready for that. You don't want the customer service work to drive your curriculum, and make sure that you're covering what you need to cover first. You shouldn't change the way you operate for somebody else. So scheduling those, though, we want to make sure that it is real world, that it's what they would see in a real shop or a real organization. But again, making sure that students are ready for that type of work. I know you're going to get pushed to do things, and sometimes as a new teacher it's hard to say no, but lean on your course of study, lean on the scope and sequence of the curriculum that you're teaching to do that. And again, making sure that your students are ready, and then also, if you don't have on a receipt or any sort of work order that you put together for clients, that there needs to be some sort of disclaimer that says this work is done by students. And so many times I think people from the community come in and they think they're going to get the same level of service that they would at the local company. And that's not always the case, because you're working with students. You're going to take longer. The quality may not be the same. And so that needs to be a disclaimer. And I think a lot of career centers have that on the work orders and the receipts that they provide for customer service work. When you're planning student activities, you need to just make sure that there's a schedule, that there's organization, and that all students are participating. And that includes things, basic things like stocking up equipment and supplies and cleaning up and that sort of thing, that everybody is taking part in all the activities in the laboratory. And one of the ways you can do this is put together a lab organization chart. And again, this could be for cleaning up or just general lab management, where you make sure that students are rotating through the process. And again, this is something that takes the load off of you, so you have more time for instruction and less time dealing with just management and cleanup issues. So you can easily develop a chart that incorporates everybody, in all the students in your program. A couple of words about work-based learning, because we are being encouraged to send more of our students on internships, work-based placements. These are just some of the different names that I've heard tossed about, and different school districts call it different things. It essentially is putting students into the workplace, and most of the time this happens in the senior year, but sometimes it's happening in the junior year. But we're trying to get students into meaningful work in the workplace, so they have an idea of what is expected before they graduate from high school. Some things for you to worry about while students are on work-based placements. The first one is the appropriateness. Is it going to be somewhere where students can benefit? We would like to see work-based placements to be an extension of the classroom where they can learn things maybe at the organization that you can't teach them. They have other equipment or other resources that you don't have access to. So hopefully it extends or adds on to the training and education that you're providing for them. Another issue is teacher supervision. You're going to need to check in on your students. And when are you going to do that? Are you going to do it after school? Is your school district going to give you time to do that? If you're running around 2 or 3 different counties checking on students after school, it can make for a long afternoon and early evening for you. And are you going to get compensated for that, or is that just one of those other duties as assigned? So that's something to think about, is who's going to do the supervision. Sometimes there's a school district person that will do that for you, but not in many cases that's not what happens. Liabilities with job-based placements. Making sure that it's not only an appropriate placement as far as the task that the students are going to be performing, but it's also a safe place. If you walk in and the organization, the company is a mess and they're not requiring students to wear safety glasses or safety equipment, that's probably a place you're not going to want to put your students, because just because you've put them there does not absolve you of responsibility. It's still part of a school-based process, and you need to make sure that that company is a safe place for students, because if something happens, you can still be held liable if you didn't do your due diligence and check them out ahead of time. And the last piece is paperwork. Every time we put a student in a school-based or work-based placement, there's paperwork that has to be signed, generally by the student, the parents, by you, by the administrator, by the work-based supervisor. So, you know, there are papers that have to be filed in triplicate and everybody has to agree. And most districts now have work-based agreements that spell out responsibilities of the student, of the parent, of the instructor of the school, and also the work-based placement. So just realize that there's paperwork that's going to have to be done. You're going to also need to bone up a little bit on child labor laws. Most of your students at this age, 17 or 18, still are under child labor laws, and you're going to find that there are some companies that they may be not have the knowledge of child labor laws that they need to have, or they're just ignoring child labor laws. There are certainly places that work students past the hours that they're supposed to be worked, and students are generally reluctant to bring that up. They don't want to be to rock the boat and get themselves perhaps dismissed because they've said, hey, I can't work past 11 o'clock on a school night. You need to know what those laws and regulations are and stick up for your students. When you take Dr. Pinchak's 5655 class, he spends a good bit of time talking about child labor laws, and these relate to Ohio laws and also federal laws. And just to give you some more ideas, there are different ages that are required for working in different occupations, and so you need to know what those are if you're going to be placing students in a variety of situations. So just a bit more information about child labor laws. And again, we go into more detail in the work-based learning class that we do have in the spring. So those are just a few basic issues related to student activities in the classroom and in the laboratory.